So in this video, what we're going to look at is how we can use HTML and JavaScript to create a really cool dynamic quiz. So to start off with in our HTML, what we need to do is create some elements. So I've started off by putting a title quiz. Now in our quiz, we're going to need three sections. We're going to need somewhere to display our question, somewhere for the user to respond, and a section for our user to get some feedback about if they're wrong or right. So we're going to create those sections using some ID tags. So we're going to create a PID to start with, which is going to equal question. This is where we're going to print our question. So we'll close our P tag off. And then we are going to, making sure I do that correctly, we're then going to have a section where the user can enter their answer. So we're going to create an input ID, and this is going to equal the answer that the person is entering, making sure that we close off the input as well. And then we're going to have another PID section called feedback, where we're going to feedback if they were one of the sections there. So let's go feedback in here, and let's close off one of those sections there, and close P tag there. So that's got our basic HTML section worked out. So in our script.js, what we need to do is we need to first of all create an array of questions. So we're going to call it questions, and we're going to have, it's going to equal an array, semicolon on the end. Now we want to put an object in there. So remember, an object has multiple properties. So our question is going to have the question and the answer. So what we're going to write within this is, to start off with, enter down to make this easier, our curly brackets for our first object. We're going to use Q, and then we're going to use our two dots, and we're going to write our question. So let's do something really simple, like what is 1 plus 1? We're then going to put a comma after that section, and we're going to have another property called the answer, which we're going to call A, and the answer to that, the answer will be 2. So notice that the question is a string, and the answer is stored as a number. Let's add another question. So let's do the same thing. Question this time will be 2 plus 2, and then we'll go comma, and then the answer will be 4. So that's a really, really basic array of objects for our questions. So we're going to have to write a couple of functions to get us started. And the first function is to basically print out our question onto the screen. So we're going to call this print question as our first function. And what we need to do basically is we need to go to that section in our questions. So document get element by ID, and in brackets, where do we want to print this? We want to access the questions section, and then we want to go into the inner HTML of it, and we want to write out our question. So we want to write out our question, which is up here in our array. So the first thing to do is write question, which is the name of our array, and in square brackets, we're going to put 0 to access the first question, and what we want to print out is the question. Okay, so when we run this question, it's going to go to that section in our file over here called question, and it's going to print out our first question over here. So what we also need to do is call this function. So what we're going to do is put a print Q on top. This is going to run the function called print question. Let's hit run and see what happens. Okay, looks like we've got an error on this side on line 8. Looks like we've got some cannot set property in HTML of null. So what is really important is that this section here needs to match up with what I've written here. So we called this section question, but in my JS file, I called it question. So I need to make sure it says question. Let's run it again and see if that fixes our error. Cool. See how that our 1 plus 1 has appeared? So we've got our question printing on the screen to start with. We've got a box here, but we need to have a button now that we can use to go and check our particular question is right. So let's write our function first. The function will be check. Let's check the answer. So we'll go check answer. Make sure you spell it correctly. 2 parentheses. All right, and our curly brackets. So when we run the check answer function, the first thing we need to do is to get the answer from the user. So we need to go document get element by ID. And remember that we called this box back in our HTML file we called it answer, ANS. So we're going to get the value from answer, and we write dot value. Now, the other thing we need to consider here is that we're expecting them to enter a number into this box. So we need to convert that to an integer. So we're going to write pass int and put brackets around all that code so that that value is converted to an integer so that we can check it. So once we've got that value, now we need to check it against to see if it is equal to 2. So we're going to write an if statement. So if the answer is equal to question square bracket 0 dot a, then we want to do something over here. So remember we had that feedback section down the bottom here. So we are going to then write document dot get. So make sure you spell document correctly, otherwise we're going to get some errors. So document dot get element by ID, and this time inside of our brackets we are going to type where we want to write this, which is feedback dot inner HTML equals, we're just going to write something like correct. So there we've got a really simple function to check our question. So the only thing we're missing over here now is a button that's going to, when we click on the button, run this function. So let's go back into our HTML and let's put it under our input. Let's create a button ID, which is going to equal, let's call it check button. We're going to check the answer, and we're going to write add a listener. So on click equals, what was our function called? It was called check answer. So let's go back and double check. So our function here is called check answer. So we'll write check answer and 2 parentheses afterwards. Then we need to close our button off, and then we need to add our close button tag. And in between those 2 tags, we're going to write our button. So we're going to go check answer. So let's run our code and see if we get everything working. So 1 plus 1, I'm going to put the answer in 2, check the answer, correct. If I type in another answer 3, we still get correct at the moment. So that's not, we want to be able to have some incorrect feedback. So let's go and change that. So we put our if statement here, which is if it's right, else we're going to add, if it's incorrect, we're going to copy this code here, copy, I'm going to paste it in here, but this time we're going to add incorrect into our position. So that's going to get it working so far, but we've got how many questions? We've got 2 questions in our data bank, and at the moment we're accessing only 0 in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a counter to our questions so we can access each part. So we're going to create a global variable called qcount, and we're going to make that equal 0 to start with. And wherever it says 0 in here we're accessing the array, we're going to write qcount. And we're also going to, so that's for printing or checking the correct answer. And we also need to change it up here inside what we print the question out. So we'll write qcount. And then what we need to do is that after we've actually done a question and we've given the feedback, we want to increase the qcount by 1. So we go qcount plus plus. So we'll go from 0 to 1, which means then we can access the next question. So let's see how we go. Let's give it a run. So our first answer was 2. Check the answer, print it out correct, but it didn't update our question here. So let's go back and see what might be going wrong. So let's jump back into our print question. So the print question is in a function. We run the print question here to start with to be the beginning of our question. What we also need to do that after we've actually run the qcount and we've given them their feedback, we need to run the print question function again. So we need to make sure we spell that correctly, print q. So let's update our function this time. So after we've given the feedback, it's added 1 to the question count, it will run the print question as well. So let's see how we go here. 2, check answer. Next one updates to 4, check answer. So we can see that our code is working really well. So there is an example of a really basic quiz.